Everybody, a good Sunday afternoon to you. The perfect Sunday afternoon for what I'm going to be making here because it's cloudy. We had a lot of rain this morning. It's rather damp and chilly out there, 40s and low 50s. So what I'm going to be making is a variation of a risotto. If you've not had risotto before, it is a dish from northern Italy, generally as a first course, but it's made with rice. And in this case, we're going to make it with Ditalini pasta, which is just that little short tubular pasta that's, if you think of it like ziti, it's sort of cut up from there. I'll show it to you here coming up in just a couple minutes. But we're going to use that instead. But the rest of the ingredients, the base ingredients, will be the same. Onion, butter, Romano cheese or Parmesan cheese, and white wine, of which I've already poured myself a glass. So that'll all get folded in along with a little bit of beef broth. We'll stir it all together. We'll add some greens at the end and a little bit more cheese, and you're all set. And I think even with the greens in it, the kids will dig it because it still has that kind of creamy, cheesy, pasta-y feel to it, and the greens will be cooked down. So hopefully everybody wins. I know there are a lot of fussy eaters out there, so if I can be of help, that's a good thing. As I told you in my first video in making migas, something I've made 8,000 times, which is an exaggeration. It's only been like 7,800 times. This I've never made. So I just have this recipe here. I follow Bon Appetit on Twitter, and I printed this recipe off. It's been sitting in my folder. This is my big recipe folder. If I lived to be 197, I wouldn't get through all these recipes, but there are some good ones in here, and I've been trying different things, this being one of them. So you guys are kind of my guinea pig today, and it's just more of an exercise in what I'm trying to tell you is that cooking is not difficult. It's just like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get at it, just because you become more comfortable, more confident. And not only that, even just going down a recipe, a lot of times you'll have to improvise. If you don't have something that a recipe calls for, you got to go, oh, what can I substitute? And I'm going to be doing that here because there are a few things on here that I don't have, but I'm going to show you those workarounds. So we're going to get into all that. We'll start chopping and dicing, and we'll get things cooking. It'll be done sort of in stages, so the entire process will be, I'm guessing, about an hour and 15 minutes or so. We'll stir everything up, and then we're all set for the rest of the afternoon. Nice comfort food. I have my Beat Bama shirt on. This is the Auburn-Alabama rivalry, which, if you didn't know, I'm a huge Auburn football fan and oftentimes a walking billboard for them. The SEC Network showed the Auburn-Alabama game last week, so I recorded it. I'm going to watch it this afternoon, and I'll bet we beat their ass again. How about that? So I'm going to get going here on some chopping things, so I'm going to slide into that. Hope you enjoy this process as much as I do. All right, here we go. We're going to get rolling on things. As I mentioned in my cooking short yesterday when we were talking about migas, and I said most times you want to heat your pan up before you put anything into it. Well, this is an exception to that, and I'm going to tell you why here in just a second. But I put in a little bit of butter and about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and we put that in there and just kind of let it swirl around a little bit. The thing about cooking with butter is this, in my experience, if I can do without it, I definitely do. There are a lot of times when you can substitute olive oil for butter and you'll never notice it taste-wise, and it's just a lot better for you. This is not one of those times. So I'm kind of doing half and half with olive oil and butter. It's just one of those trade-offs. I'll just have to jump rope for an extra 10 minutes tomorrow and we'll be in good shape. As I mentioned too, I don't have all the ingredients that the recipe specifically calls for, and one of those here is 2 tablespoons of garlic oil. So I don't have garlic oil made up, but it's actually kind of easy to make on the fly. You can make it in bigger batches if you wanted to store it. But what I'm going to do is these are just regular garlic cloves that I've just taken off of the main, and I'm going to smash them down, just press down on them good and hard. And then when you do that, the skin separates from it, which is nice. It just makes it a lot easier to peel. And then you can just toss that away. And then what I'm going to do is just basically toss this in as this butter and oil continues to heat up. I'm just going to toss the garlic in there with it. So the garlic will lightly toast. What it will do by smashing it down is it just sort of releases all of the aromas and the flavors that are inside of the garlic bulb itself. And you can leave that in there if you want, or if you don't want that much garlic and you want to take that out, you can just take the cloves out and compost them or toss them or whatever it is you do. So while that's going on, I'm going to cut this onion up because that is the first ingredient. And once we put the onion in there, that's going to sit and saute for about 15 minutes or so. As I mentioned too in my first short, I like to cut off both ends of the onion. Be very careful. You know, again, you'll always have to be careful when you're cutting things and dealing with knives and everything else. But take everything, get rid of it. The cool thing about cutting onions up is that you do have a little bit of leverage in the thicker part here, this part of the onion, like kind of the middle. So I just like to take 2 swipes with a knife on either side, flip it around, and then do another 2 swipes, and then just work your way in from there, because that way you have more leverage with the onion, and there's just less of an opportunity for the knife to slip. By the way, having a sharp knife, so important, because if a knife is not sharp enough, what'll happen is it'll slide off of whatever you're cooking, especially something with a thicker skin on it, like a tomato. Sometimes the skin can be rather thick. So what'll happen is the knife will not cut the tomato, it'll slide off the skin and it'll slide into your finger or whatever. You don't want that to happen, obviously. And when you're dicing onions this way, same goes like slicing this way. When you turn them this way to put a good dice on them, just do it about halfway up, or not quite to halfway up. Spin the onion around, and then that way you just have a lot more to hold on to as you continue to dice away. All right, so our onions are chopped up. The butter is starting to what we call foam, where you can see these little bubbles that are on there. The garlic has been good and flattened out, so it's releasing all of its chemical components, if you will, into the butter and the oil, so that will give it a nice little flavor. And then from here, what I'm going to do is just pop these onions in. Just sort of toss them around a little bit. You can do that with a spatula or a wooden spoon, or just kind of shake them all out. And then I'm just going to let these onions sit for about 15 or 20 minutes, I think is what this says. 12 to 18. So we'll just kind of keep an eye on it. And then after that is when we're going to start to add our liquid, and then we'll start to add the pasta, and that's when everything will begin to cook down. So hang tight. I'll be right back. All right, so our onions are in. They've been in for about 15 minutes or so, so we're going to move on to the next phase of things. And in keeping up with one of the most important things in your cooking experience, if you don't need something, get rid of it. We don't need the knife and cutting board anymore. There's nothing else to chop or dice, so let's just get it out of the way, especially a knife, because again, you don't want to cut yourself, and just frees up whatever little space you have or whatever big space you have as well. I like this Cavett Pinot Grigio. When I waited tables in Washington when I was in school, it was always a really good value wine, and they sell it in these big now magnums, which is the equivalent of 2 bottles. It's inexpensive, it's decent quality, and it's good to cook with, and you can sip on it a little bit as well. I mean, it's not, going to be winning any awards or anything like that, but otherwise, it definitely fits the bill, especially if it's something that you're going to cook with. So, what I need to do now is just pour this in to the pan, and I'm going to bring it up to a boil. And what that will do is, as we impart a little bit of weather in this, I'm just going to kind of stir this around and all that. So what's going to happen is, as this liquid starts to boil, first of all, the alcohol will burn off. That'll be the first thing to go, and it will reduce. And that's sort of a common term in cooking, where you might have heard the term, a balsamic reduction or whatever. All you're basically doing is removing the water from whatever it is that you are cooking. So we're going to boil this down to about half. And from there, we just have to add the pasta, broth, then eventually the cheese, and we're about halfway home. This will take about, as it starts to boil off here, it'll take about another 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll continue on from there. All right, so it's been a couple of minutes, and this wine is really reduced down nicely, and we've got kind of a nice little mix of some garlic and onion, a little butter, a little olive oil, and then the wine reduction in there. And now from here, what we need to do is we've got to add 2 cups of beef broth, and then we'll add the pasta. And then that's when sort of the slower cooking process will take place, because what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the pasta to absorb the liquid, and then we'll add another cup, one at a time, here for about the next about 20 minutes or so, and we'll just kind of continue to keep an eye on it. So this is the Ditalini, and again, there's just this little kind of little tubular pasta here. You can see that. So I'm going to pour that in, and then toss it around. So all of this is going to become one dish, but it's going to take some time for everything to come together. Obviously, this pasta has to be cooked, so it's the liquid that I just poured in there that's going to cook the pasta as opposed to just putting it in boiling water. So as that liquid starts to evaporate and the pasta starts to soak it up, we'll add another cup, and then I'll probably have to do that another 2 to 3 times. You just have to make sure you have enough liquid on hand, but sometimes it's difficult to tell how much you'll need. And then you just kind of continue to fold that in, and then we'll finish the process with a little bit of cheese and put the greens in, and we'll be almost home. Stay tuned. I'll be back. This is the first 2 cups that I just poured in. It's been about 10 minutes or so, and I've turned the heat down to about medium-high and just stirring quite a bit just to make sure that nothing sticks. You don't want the pasta to stick to the bottom or anything like that. And I'm going to add my 3rd cup of beef broth. We'll let that reduce down, and then we're going to add another one, and then probably another one after that. But we've got plenty on hand, and things continue to progress along. All right, we're almost home. I've got 5 cups total of liquid in here, and you can see it's almost kind of like a little stew, if you will, or like a pasta fazool. That's what this pasta is used in a lot of times as well. But I've left a little bit of extra liquid in there. I didn't let it cook all the way down. The pasta is what we call al dente, so it's not, the last thing you want is mushy pasta. So it still has a little bit, it's not crunchy, but it's still, you can tell that it's got a little bit of time left to cook, but it's going to continue to cook. Now, this is what I was talking about too in terms of deviating from a recipe, especially if you've got folks that are not big fans of vegetables and greens. The recipe calls for me to just put some of these greens on top of the pasta. I'm going to actually cook it in with some of the liquid. This is just a little organic mix of baby kale, mustard greens, and what else do we have in here? Chard and spinach. So it's all good stuff. These big old leafy greens, it calls for 2 cups, which generally is about a handful or so per cup. So I'm going to throw that in there. You'll be surprised at how quickly the greens will wilt down. And, you know, be generous with it. Throw a bunch in there if you want to. The greens really start to wilt down, and they will not take long to do so. And then the last thing that I'll have to do is just to add the cheese, and then that will really kind of put everything all together. I have a little bit of parsley left over from something I cooked last week, and I absolutely abhor putting anything to waste. So try to use anything that I have. So the recipe doesn't call for parsley, but I'm going to put it on there as a little garnish. So you'll see me plating up here the finished product in just a couple minutes. We'll add the cheese first. All right, well, I ended up actually putting the rest of the greens in there. Again, just further evidence that a lot of times when you're cooking things, you just improvise on the fly and just kind of see what looks good and what makes sense. And now we've got plenty of greens in here, and there's still a little bit of liquid left, but I've got some on standby because I'm going to be putting in a half a cup of Romano cheese. And these cheeses are very hard, so they're very dry, so they absorb a lot of liquid in a short amount of time. So as I stir this around here, it'll become a little bit more like a thick stew, which is okay. I mean, you know, the consistency is what it is. It just depends on kind of what you like. If you want a little bit more of like a soup, well, add a little bit more liquid. If you want something a little thicker, then just leave it as is. So as I'm mixing this around, the rest of the liquid that's in here is getting absorbed pretty well by that cheese. And as the pasta continues to absorb, because again, I didn't cook it all the way, because if you cooked it too much, well, then it's just going to get mushy. And mushy pasta will ruin a dish in a heartbeat. So you don't want that. If anything, undercook it, and then it will continue to cook throughout the process. So we'll cut that off. I'm going to actually put just a little bit more liquid in here just to thin it out a little bit. It's a little bit too thick for my liking. But again, you just kind of eyeball that, and I think that's just going to be working out perfectly. So there you have it. Got a nice little creamy texture. So I'm going to take just a little bit of this. I'm going to spoon it into my bowl. A couple of twists of pepper. And as I said, not in the recipe, but a little bit of parsley will go a long way. Whoops. Maybe a little bit of olive oil if you wanted to drizzle a little bit more on there. And of course, if you wanted to add a little bit more cheese, well, you can never have too much cheese if you ask me. So there is your Ditalini risotto. This was my second go at my cooking short, so I hope that you enjoyed it. As we get through the week, now that we'll be back into at least some semblance of a routine, I'll be bringing you some shorter videos that'll be a lot more fast for you to cook things. The first thing that I'm going to be doing for you tomorrow, the perfect grilled cheese. I assure you, you've not had one better, and you'll be able to make it when you're done watching that video too. That's it for now, guys. Hope you have a great night, and stay tuned on jasonsweather.com for all the latest weather and anything else I can think of during these times.